Okay, so today we're going to talk about assistive technology to enhance communication. And really, when we're talking about early on, as early as the 1970s, we start to see the first devices that incorporate technology into the devices to support people to be able to have a voice. And if you think of Stephen Hawking, he um, certainly would not have been able to speak without the microchip and one of the first talking devices. So we certainly know that students in the category of deafness and or hard of hearing benefit from technology, and the problems they encounter certainly are being able to follow any kind of speaking lectures, communicating with peers, teachers, communicating over the phone. And technology tools that address that communication are certainly, we're all familiar with alerting devices, devices that have some kind of visual attached to it. We're familiar with using the amplified telephones and the TTY systems, the relay services. I've certainly used those. We have other devices, though, that are pictured here as well. We have, I think, really one of the greatest is the ability to text message and the ability to voice within text as well, so the speak-to-read devices. And here's some examples of alerting devices. I think all of us can benefit from a lot of these things as well, but certainly when we're talking about disability, these are needed. Here's some examples that, we know that teachers use FM systems in classes, but there's certainly other aids that support people to be able to hear better, people that are hard of hearing. I know my husband relies on aids at this point in his life. So we need to be able to support our students that use assistive listening devices, or ALDs. We need to be knowledgeable about the device. We need to know about the technology support. We need to know when and how these devices are used. We need to be able to position ourselves correctly and the microphones correctly. We need to be able to consult with doctors, audiologists, speech-language pathologists, anyone that is involved with our children that we serve. We need to be able to inform the class about the child's disability and the devices they use. We need to be able to position ourselves again. We need to be able to make sure we're using the technology for everything that we need to, and we need to be able to understand the technology hardware as well. We might need to be checking it. We also know certainly that students with physical disabilities need to rely on augmentative, assistive technologies, sometimes augmentative and alternative communication systems. And so a lot of behaviors could stem from the disability being able, or I should say being unable to communicate. And here's really more medical terminology. We don't necessarily use this in education, but you might see something in a report or an IEP that addresses dysarthria and or dyspraxia. And certainly we know that many children that we serve do not have the oral motor muscles, such as children with cerebral palsy again, to essentially communicate. And dyspraxia, meaning really the speech musculature is not there as well, or is delayed or affected or impacted in some way. But in any event, we have, certainly we know that children with physical disabilities may need support with communication. When we talk about AAC, or alternative and augmentative communication systems, we break it down into unaided and aided. Now, sign language certainly may be good for some children, but we have to understand that there's certainly a cognitive level needed to learn all of the signs. A lot of the signs are not self-explanatory. I always use the example in my classrooms as the sign for milk. unless you've milked a cow, which I've never had, and many of us have not. You will not really connect the sign for milk to that particular event or experience in life. But so, and sometimes gestures and facial expressions are cultural, so we may not all be able to use unaided or understand it, and certainly for children with physical disabilities, unaided may not be an option. But then we have aided systems, and that's, as it states here, an external component, and it's certainly, they can be easier to understand than unaided. So here are some examples of Augcomm devices. We have low-tech, mid-tech, and high-tech, and your textbook throughout distinguishes between low-tech devices, mid-tech devices, and high-tech. And some low-tech certainly might be, a lot of teachers are using picture exchange communication systems laminated on various things. Here's an example of a child that uses it right on his or her wrist. Mid-tech might be something that really just provides limited vocabulary, some digitized speech also, and then we get into the high-tech, and there's a lot of different things that can be used. Certainly more and more children are using the iPad because that's socially appropriate, it's validated, it's everyone's carrying an iPad, but that certainly may not be an appropriate high-tech device for all children. Who decides? Well, the team. The multidisciplinary team is the answer. A lot of times we're involving a lot of professionals that are considered related services involved in when we're selecting the most appropriate technology for a child. Speech language pathologists, OT/PTs, and instructional technology specialists as well. What do you consider? Well, the communication demands are number one. It's not appropriate for a child just to talk about going to the bathroom and wanting a drink. The child needs to be able to talk about his or her day. You have to consider the child's motoric abilities. Can they directly select or push onto something? Or do they need some other way to access the communication device? Maybe through some kind of switching device. How is the child's language going to develop? And certainly personal preferences need to be considered. There needs to be practice and there needs to be training. So you don't just throw an augmentative and alternative communication system into the environment. There needs to be a lot of practice with it. Everyone involved, the professionals need to know how to use it so that they can use it as well, so that they can model it with the child. And so there's a training that goes on throughout. The Association for Persons with Severe Handicaps certainly has written a lot about people's rights, and certainly communication is a strong right. And I think this slide is important because it really addresses that right, and that all people should have a means to communicate that allows them to participate in the wider world. Again, not just to go to the bathroom, not just to have a drink. And a lot of times we seem to just focus on the very basic of needs, that they can communicate using a chosen method, and that their communication is listened to and addressed by others. When people lack an adequate communication system, they deserve to have others to work with them to help to provide an appropriate system. And that concludes Chapter 6.